lot of people don't know who he is. He's not a flashy hire. He's not a big name that's out there. He's not a Dan Quinn. He's not a Bill Belichick. Hey everyone, it's Josh Butts here from No Butts About It, and I am here tonight to talk to you about the Tennessee Titans' new head coaching hire, Brian Callahan. Now, of course, Brian Callahan is the offensive coordinator of the Cincinnati Bengals right now, but it is being reported by Tom Pelissero and Adam Schefter that they believe that he will be the new coach of the Tennessee Titans. This video isn't going to go super in-depth into his scheme work. It's mainly just going to be telling Titans fans who Brian Callahan is, what he's done, what they can expect, because a lot of people don't know who he is. He's not a flashy hire. He's not a big name that's out there. He's not a Dan Quinn. He's not a Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll, Mike Vrabel, one of those guys. This is kind of a guy who's flown under the radar a little bit, but Bengals fans know him and Bengals fans love him. So first, let's talk about how long he's been in the NFL. Brian Callahan has been in the NFL in various coaching capacities for 14 seasons, and he's spent the last 5 of them with the Cincinnati Bengals. So obviously he's worked with Joe Burrow, worked with Andy Dalton a little bit, and we've seen the offense that we have with Brian Callahan as the offensive coordinator. A lot of that also is attributed to the talent, but the schemes that Brian Callahan has brought to the Cincinnati Bengals have also been very beneficial. I want to look at the 2022 season because obviously Joe Burrow was really only healthy for 5 games in 2023, and we didn't get to see Brian Callahan's game plan at work. But in 2022, the Bengals offense ranked 7th in points per game. They were 8th in yards, which was 360.5 per game. And they were 5th in passing, which is 265 passing yards per game. So obviously top 10 rankings right there for the Cincinnati Bengals offense, led by Brian Callahan's schemes. The play calling was done by Zach Taylor, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But he's been in the league for 14 seasons. Where has he spent that time? Was he just kind of hanging out, doing nothing? No, he was actually working with some great quarterbacks, all names that you know. And this is where he kind of flies under the radar, in my opinion. In 2018, he was the quarterback's coach for the Raiders, and he worked with Derek Carr, who I know, let's go back to 2018 Derek Carr, not this year's Derek Carr. Carr put up career highs in passing in 2018, passing for over 4,000 yards, and he led the AFC in completion percentage with a 68.9 completion percentage. So think about what we saw with Derek Carr before, what we've seen since. In 2018, that was the best Derek Carr, and who was his quarterback coach? None other than Brian Callahan. But if that's not a flashy enough name for you, I get it. Derek Carr has been kind of a letdown for the Saints. A lot of people blame him for the Raiders not doing well in the playoffs. We'll go a little flashier for you. Matthew Stafford. He was with the Detroit Lions from 2016 to 2017. So he's obviously worked with a Hall of Fame quarterback there. He's helped build and develop Matthew Stafford while he was with the Detroit Lions. The flashiest name on this list, and by far the most impressive at this point in all of their careers, is Peyton Manning. And Brian Callahan worked with Peyton Manning from 2010 to 2015. Of course, this was when he was with the Denver Broncos. Now, Brian Callahan got a Super Bowl ring through his work with Peyton Manning, but more importantly, Brian Callahan learned so much from Peyton Manning because Peyton Manning was a veteran at this point. He'd already cemented himself as a Hall of Fame caliber quarterback. Everyone knew who Peyton Manning was in the world. And I really do think that this helped Brian Callahan with these other quarterbacks. I've seen it a little bit with Joe Burrow, some similarities in the schemes that he likes to call and the way that he kind of tries to call things that are favorable to the quarterback. And I think working with Peyton and Peyton kind of teaching him what the quarterback wants is something that really helped him work with these younger guys like Joe Burrow, because it wasn't Brian Callahan enforcing his offense onto Joe Burrow. It was him working with Joe Burrow to get an offense that works for him. And we've seen coaches that don't necessarily do that. They want the players to develop into their offense. I really do believe that if Brian Callahan hadn't worked with Peyton Manning and learned from Peyton Manning what a quarterback needs, what a quarterback sees, it probably would have hindered the development of a lot of these other guys, especially Joe Burrow. This should really excite Tennessee Titans fans because they have a young quarterback, Will Levis. You're losing Ryan Tannehill. He's going to be gone. He's going to walk as a free agent. Derrick Henry's walking as a free agent. Now you have to rebuild a team around Will Levis. And Brian Callahan has to work to develop Will Levis. So you want to bring in a coach who we know can develop a quarterback, and it may take some time to develop a team around him. I think that's why the Tennessee Titans decided to go with Brian Callahan, because he has the resume that he does. He's fairly young, and he's been around the league for a while. But guys like Bill Belichick are going to want to go to teams that are win-now situations because they're older, and they want to get those rings now. With Brian Callahan, you can maybe have 2 or 3 rebuilding seasons. I know Titans don't want that, but hey, draft well and rebuild, and I think you'll have a ton of success with Brian Callahan. Luckily, though, for that rebuild, you don't just have to draft well. That's going to be a key component to it, but players love Brian Callahan. He was voted a top 5 offensive coordinator to play for just this year. The players love him. That means that there is a very strong possibility that some of these free agents do decide to come play for Brian Callahan. They've seen what he's done for other teams around the league, and they know how good he is, and that is going to be huge for the Tennessee Titans since they're losing so many franchise guys. A.J. Brown got traded a few years ago. Derrick Henry's walking this year. We really don't have anyone there who's a franchise staple right now on offense. Now, this next part is kind of hard to distinguish because we don't know how much of the offensive scheme is Zach Taylor and how much is Brian Callahan. I do know what Callahan likes, though, and we can definitely see some trends. So Callahan has said in interviews that his favorite type of offense is the West Coast offense, and he really likes the Shanahan type offenses. So we might see a hybrid of the Shanahan type offenses, similar to what Mike McDaniels runs with the Dolphins. That is a Shanahan hybrid. Obviously, you need some very speedy guys to get that done, so maybe not the same thing in Tennessee, but definitely some similarities. We haven't seen that as much with the Bengals, though, because the personnel doesn't work as well, and it's not something that really fits with the players they have. And this goes back to the point I made earlier. Brian Callahan doesn't enforce his will on the players. He builds the scheme for the players, not the players for the scheme. That's what I'm trying to say. But Brian Callahan is not only a great schemer, a great offensive adjuster, he is great at pivoting when need be. And Lord knows in the NFL, you have to be ready to pivot. My evidence for this is during the bye week, he was on the Locked On Bengals podcast. They interviewed him, and one of the things he mentioned was that he really wanted to get more out of the tight end room. There was not a lot of production there. They had signed Irv Smith Jr. in the postseason, weren't getting a lot out of him. They wanted to get more. They also wanted to get more out of Chase Brown, who's a rookie, and figure out where he fit into the offense. Well, we saw guys like Tanner Hudson, Drew Sample, and even Irv Smith a little bit getting more touches. Tanner Hudson was a practice squad player who was all over the place at times, especially once Jake Browning became the starting quarterback. So he stuck to his word, and he figured out how to get those guys involved in the game. Chase Brown only had 2 rushing attempts before the bye week, but after the bye week, he ended with 44 attempts for 179 yards to go along with 14 catches for 156 yards and a touchdown. Remember all those explosive plays that Chase Brown had? Imagine if we had had that earlier in the season. Where would we have been? Would we be in the playoffs? We don't know. We can't say. But Brian Callahan saw a problem. He figured out how to fix it, and we saw the results. The biggest and probably most obvious piece of evidence for this as well is Jake Browning. How do you go from Joe Burrow, a top 3 quarterback in the NFL, to Jake Browning, a practice squad quarterback who had never taken an NFL snap? I mean, this guy had been cut by the Minnesota Vikings, and we saw all their quarterback problems this season once Kirk went down. Nobody knew who this guy was. He won the job over Trevor Siemian, but is that a big win? Well, Brian Callahan was able to bring some life back to the Bengals offense, even without Joe Burrow. They never gave up. They kept fighting. Jake Browning led the Bengals to 4-3 with him as the starter, and Browning had 11 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 1,868 yards, and 267 yards per game, which isn't super flashy, but it was enough to keep the Bengals afloat for a while and left fans with hope. Titans fans, if there is one concern that you should have, and I don't think that this is a major concern, I just think it's the way the Bengals do things, but it should be put out there. Brian Callahan, as I mentioned earlier, does not do the offensive play calling. He does the offensive scheming. He's been doing the red zone stuff since 2021, I believe. He does a lot of the third down stuff, but primarily Zach Taylor is the play caller. Now, Zach Taylor is an offensive-minded coach, so it makes sense why he would do the play calling, and sometimes the fans aren't a huge fan of his play calls, but nonetheless, Zach Taylor is the play caller in Cincinnati. I think that the Tennessee Titans will be okay, though, and honestly, if Brian Callahan doesn't feel okay with play calling, he can always delegate that to his offensive coordinator, and they can make it work. That shouldn't be a huge red flag, in my opinion. There's also supposedly that the Bengals have a committee on the headset. So Dan Pitcher, the quarterback's coach, Brian Callahan, and Zach Taylor all kind of talk to each other and come up with the scheme during game day and talk to each other for the play calling. I don't know how much of a say Brian Callahan actually has, though. So that's why I don't want to be like, oh, yes, Brian Callahan called this play or he recommended this play, because we don't know that. We don't have any way, to my knowledge, of knowing that. Now, Bengals fans, you may have saw this news and been looking around scared, like, who is our new offensive coordinator? Who are we replacing him with? And immediately people were texting me saying, you need to go for Cliff Kingsbury. You need to go for this guy or this guy. And honestly, I think the guy is already in the building. I think they've known the last 2 or 3 seasons that Brian Callahan, whose dad is already a huge name, is going to eventually get a head coaching job. He's going to get a chance. So they had a plan set. And I think that plan is quarterbacks coach Dan Pitcher. Now, who the heck is quarterbacks coach Dan Pitcher? And we're not going to go super deep here, but I will talk about it for a little bit. And if he ends up being named the offensive coordinator, he'll get his own video. But Dan Pitcher has been the Bengals quarterback coach for 8 seasons. He's been in the NFL for 12 seasons as a coach. He spent 2012 to 2015 with the Indianapolis Colts, where he was in charge of scouting. With Pitcher on the staff, the Colts compiled a 41-23 regular season record, 3 playoff berths, including 2 AFC South championships, and Pitcher was responsible for all the scouting, free agency, drafting, aiding. He didn't draft the people, but he was like, hey, this guy's pretty good. That's great for the Bengals, who are going to need to do that if they want to continue to be this powerhouse. You need to have good drafting. You need to have these rookie contracts, and they need to be good. That's great for the Bengals. I'm excited to potentially have Dan Pitcher as the offensive coordinator. We'll see what he can do. But also, Titans fans, I think you should be excited for Brian Callahan. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. Comment what you think below about this hiring. And if you like it, if you don't like it, and make sure to let me know why. Until next time, go do something nice for someone. Thanks for watching that video, guys. If you want to check out a most recent full episode of No Buts About It, that's going to be right over here. Yep, right there. Check that out. And if you just want to see more short clips, we're going to have one right over here for you to watch. Check out No Buts About It on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you listen to podcasts, so you can listen to us on the go. Once again, have a great day and go do something nice for someone.